Information overload is real. Your members are overwhelmed, distracted, and selective about what they engage with. So how do you make sure your programming stands out? Content alone isn't enough. It's not just about what you're saying, it's about who you're saying it to, how you deliver it, and whether it lands at the right time. And that's what we're talking about today. Hey everyone, and welcome to the Association Amplified podcast. This is the show where we break down the biggest challenge associations face today, bridging the member value gap. Today's episode is all about how context can make or break engagement. All right, joining me today is Brianna Pirelli, creative program and project producer here at Workabee TV. Brianna, welcome back to the podcast.
Always a pleasure.
I'm really excited about getting into our talk today. It's kind of dovetails with the previous conversation that we had together. And really what I want to get to the heart of is that there may be associations out there that are currently trying to deploy some level of programming for their members. But the performance of that content may not be living to their expectations, or at least to what they hoped. But aside from analyzing, hey, is the content itself actually the issue? Or is there any sort of extenuating considerations that we should be making? And one of those considerations that I hope we'll cover is context. So let's begin kind of unwrapping what we mean by context.
Right. So the saying, content is king. Build it and they will come. As long as associations focus on the executing the highest level of content, that's going to be all they need, right? But it's not actually true. Context is queen, and it's equally important. The two monarchs of engagement, I suppose. Context, just to paint a picture, can mean several different things. So it can be, what has everyone watched before the point that they see this content? What does a person come in knowing, and what are their expectations for the content? What's the ecosystem or the delivery mechanism that the content exists in? What are they expected to do afterward? And all of those things are going to shape how the content is ultimately received. And if it's received at all, if it's going to be engaged with, and how they're going to act after they watch it. So all of those things are equally important. I cooked up a little analogy. So the way we often have conversations with associations that go kind of like this. So imagine I'm driving on the highway and you're in the passenger seat, right? And I'm like, oh, here comes a semi, gotta be on my toes. And then you're like, hey there, Brianna, would you like a large and runny sundae in a bowl that needs to be eaten with two hands? And I would be like, no, Marcus, get that sundae out of my face. I'm trying to keep us on the road. And then your takeaway would be guess she doesn't like ice cream, or I guess that ice cream is no good. And it's no, I love ice cream, just not at this time. Or then later where you and I are in the Arctic Research Center or whatever, and you're like, how about that ice cream now, right? And I'm like, no, and you're like, see, she hates it. She hates that ice cream, right? So the content is the ice cream. It could be the most delicious sundae in the world, but the context is equally important.
I love that metaphor. Very, very humorous. I'm just picturing shoving a runny sundae in front of your nose while you're trying to drive us somewhere. Okay, so my takeaway from that is really getting to the heart of when and where is important when you're distributing the content that you're producing.
Timing and relevance is definitely a big part of it. We talk a lot about it being really important to be the first responder on emerging topics in your sector. For you to be the voice of the industry, you have to be there at the point when people are like, oh, this has come up, I'm looking for information. And if you're not there and they've already had the discussion, and then you're like, me too, guys, and you sail in to provide your little synopsis of everything that has already happened, people are just going to be like, yeah, we're over that already. We're on to the next thing, right? So that's really important. Another thing related to timing and relevance is when they're hoping to receive what piece of information. So I like to think of this as, imagine it's a picture and you're seeing it from far away and it's just a shape. And then as time progresses, it's gaining resolution, right? It gets closer and closer to the clear picture. I have a little example. Like, so say you were having an annual event. Like the first thing people just want to know is existence of the event and what's the broad date. Like, where is it? Is it in Florida? Is it in May? And then later they're going to be thinking about things like, oh, I'm going to book my hotel. Like, what are my flights going to be? And then they're thinking about things like, oh, like what sessions do I want to attend? Like, what booths do I want to visit? Like, you can't start like, visit this booth, like at the stage when they're still here. They're like, I'm just learning that there's an event in May. Like, we're not talking about booths. And we really learned this the hard way. Like 10 years ago, we used to book speaking opportunities at association events sometimes. And we would be like, Worker Bee as an organization loves to plan. Like that's really like part of our identity is like planning real good. So we would be months ahead of the association event and we'd be trying to schedule these speakers for speaking opportunities. And they wanted to do it, right? But they would be like, why are you calling me now? Like, stop it. Like, the event is 2 months away. And I need to think about, like, I haven't, like, booked my hotel. I haven't thought about, like, what my day is going to look like. I can't think about, like, I have an empty schedule and then I just have speaking opportunity, like, in the middle of a void. Like, they're just not ready to engage at that level yet. So think about the intellectual journey you're taking them on. And we did learn from our mistakes. Like now we schedule them much closer to the event, like when they're actually starting to think about how their day is going to shape up and how we're going to fit into it. But the point is that timing and relevance of when they receive a certain piece of information. The entire context of everything that you're putting out, everything that a member is going to see. Like imagine that they watched every piece of content, right? So, okay, I'm going to think of like a simplified version of an association's content plan. Say your whole content plan was you have this rockstar member. He's the guy. Everyone's waiting to hear from him. And he has 40 insights across your entire industry. And you record a like 2-hour interview with him, 40 insights. The way in which you deliver that information is going to significantly change the way that it's perceived, even though it's the exact same information. So you could deliver that as one single interview with Guy, 2 hours long, right? You could deliver that content as like each video is one insight. So that's like 40 little videos, right? How does that change how that ultimately lands on your member? So you don't want to spread it too thin. Sometimes the thought is that more content is more engagement opportunities, more opportunities to be seen. It's always better, right? But you also want to think about what that communicates about the value of each piece of content. Does that mean that your content is dust in the wind? If they know that that guy puts out an insight every day, are they gonna, when it comes by their inbox, be like, whoa, better catch this? They'll be like, nah, like I'll catch the next one, right? Like your content is diluted, I suppose. The value of, the more you stretch out the assets, the value of each asset could be diluted potentially. The next thing I would urge you to consider is who your member is that is receiving the content. So every association has different types of members and members in a different stage of their engagement with the association. So there's perhaps student members, associate members, core members, retirement gold members. So even though you probably deliver key pillar topic content that's relevant to members across all of these categories, that piece of content could land differently depending on what type of member that person is. So if it's a student member and you're talking to them at the level of like, oh, we already know all this, we're starting the content like at a very advanced stage, and they might be like, oh, this isn't for me, and they won't get value out of that. But conversely, you could be delivering something that's too Mickey Mouse to a very advanced member. Most people in the association space are a little ways along the pipeline of understanding like what AI is now. So to start a video like generative AI is this and that at a very basic level could turn off someone that's, engaging with your content at a higher level. So want to make sure that you're personalizing content for each of these segments, for the persona they are and for their stage in the consumer pipeline, and then making sure that they're finding that content in the formats that make sense for them. So say if it's a young member and we know that their demographic of people like to listen to podcasts, maybe the podcast speaks to things at a more entry level, right? If we know that the gold members like to engage with the newsletter or something like that, like maybe the newsletter is where you find those like in-depth articles or something like that. Like figure out where they are, and what they need, and get it to them.
I think those are all fair points. I mean, it's definitely important that when we're developing programming for members that we're really hitting on those key areas that are relevant to the whole member journey. There's a balance there that I think in most cases we don't need to be too worried about, say, speaking over members' heads. If for the most part, associations can really focus on creating content that um, is really facilitating where their members app are as a whole. There can be some special consideration to like new members and where those knowledge bases typically are. But I think even young members are very aspirational in terms of their desire to grow, and that mostly happens through facilitating that really high level information and education, and that is ultimately how folks do grow. Cadence is a really interesting one where you want to be delivering content on a such a basis where it becomes very predictable, where it's part of kind of like the average member's work week. They kind of see it as something like that. But if you overproduce, then they simply can't keep up. And I think it's at that level where folks can't keep up with what you're producing, where they're either going to latch on to the specific pieces of content that matter the most to them, or they can't keep up and then they start just delaying engaging with, say, the newsletter, which may be perhaps your members' favorite way of getting pinged about anything that's new and relevant. Ultimately, I think it's better to be on the overproducing side than the underproducing side, because you're never going to reinforce that habit and the expectation that, hey, my association is putting out this regularly scheduled programming and I can rely on it. And each one of these things contains this different category of information inside of it. Basically, just long way of saying, I know what I expect when this email comes to my inbox. I know what to expect, and when I see the thumbnail for this piece, I know what to expect. Because ultimately, what you can do is, as any good plan, you need to look at the KPIs behind it and say, okay, let's double down on what's working. And if we need to, let's scale back on what isn't. But I guess kind of one final note, I'm interested in your reaction to this, is like kind of more strategically understanding that inevitably some content will underperform versus others. And my personal viewpoint is like, that's okay. If you're picking your topics really thoughtfully, for the most part, you should be mostly producing evergreen content. And if it's in written format or video format, as long as it's titled and described properly, it will serve either a prospective member or a member eventually. And not seeing your strategy as everything's got to be a knockout punch, but this all-encompassing plan that's going to provide a really good coverage on the topics that matter most to our target audience. There is value in that, because you could go very narrow in your focus and go very heavy on those things, and it'll produce a lot of engagement on those key areas. But you're really going to be missing all the extenuating topics that are relevant. So it really matters up to your association in terms of how much of a stomach you have for covering the general topic of your industry, all the topics of your industry, versus really putting a lot of focused effort on the things that matter most. I'd say if you're at the stage where you're really concerned about delivering some significant wins in, say, like the first 12 months, or perhaps you currently are running some sort of programming and you really want to increase engagement, then you probably want to narrow your focus and really nail down a few different series that are reliable sources of engagement, and trying to improve those before you venture out any further. When I talk about covering your industry pretty widely, a lot of that is kind of done already for you. And this will be very relevant to you, Brianna, is that through like your publications that you have right now, say any studies that are being done, your journal, those are usually pretty good sources in covering a lot of the things that are relevant to members. And if you're trying to really get good at delivering programming for your website, having a focus on a few new media pieces, so video content, live content, you could put extra effort into those to making sure that you're hitting the things that are most immediately on your members' mind.
Yeah, there was a few things in there that I want to touch on. Way back at the beginning, you said that you would definitely err on the side of overproducing rather than underproducing, and I completely agree. I think that you should never operate under the expectation that your member will view every piece of content you make, and that's totally fine. But for my personal standard of excellence, I like to imagine that they do and think about if they did see all of this content, could each piece deliver unique value? So say you have one, it's always going to be your core topics, right? And say you made a social media release about topic, and then you did a micro learning video about topic, and you did a webinar about topic, and they all said exactly the same thing. What I personally would like to do is make sure that they're each attacking it from a slightly different angle so that the whole web of content, each piece has value, even if somebody did consume all the pieces, but also making sure that never to expect that people actually would consume all of the pieces. Another thing that you mentioned was the creation of series and the idea of focusing on evergreen content. And parts of that I agree with. And then there's a little bit of an area where I kind of disagree or think it requires a caveat. So I think that old broadcast and even in the early stages of association content, we used to focus on, I would almost say intentionally making videos that are devoid from context. So we have a guy in a room, you don't know where it is, you don't know when it is. It's just a guy in a suit, right? And he's saying some content, and it's not specific to like any news that just happened, right? It's not specific to, like, he's not responding to any particular moment in time. He's saying something about the business or about the sector that will always be applicable. And you're like, yes, like we have our evergreen piece of content, and we can like, and this will continue to provide value for generations to come. And that's true. And that's still good, right? But I think that the way that people have been consuming content with social media, where there's an immediacy and the way people want to engage with their association, where they feel like they're on the pulse of what's going on in the industry, that people don't mind so much to have like a set series that establishes like what they're going to get for their expectations, but it will also say like it exists in a unified ecosystem. It doesn't like exist in a void alone from time and space to like continue it being evergreen. It could say something like, this is in response to what happened at this conference, or like this just happened in the news, or in this episode of series we tackled this, or in a previous episode we talked about this and this. Why don't you go view this episode if you want to hear more about this? And just like calling back to those other pieces of content or other things that happened, and like creating that context, I suppose. But I still think that those pillar evergreen pieces of content are always still going to be good, right?
Yeah, I guess the nuance there, and I think we're closer together when we were further apart on that, is like, evergreen content's even a funny word, because that kind of, in today's age, that really means like not immediately past expiration date. Like what I mean by that is evergreen can be something that lasts you a couple months, realistically, not years, because nothing lasts years. But from more of like a strategic marketing perspective, the content that you're producing is evergreen, as in it's still working for you from like an SEO perspective, right? So is it really going to be working for you as far as your members go? No, I mean, I would hope that your members aren't having to look at stuff that's like a year or two old, to be able to try and find value, because you should be constantly keeping their attention with something that's ever increasingly more relevant to what's happening in the, on a quarterly basis. That's really what's going to be the sweet spot as far as grabbing people's attention and it being engaging. is for sure relevance, and relevance to what's happening based off of, say, politics, economics, whatever the drivers of change and friction are. If you're delivering on that, as well as on the other side, delivering on the practical knowledge that members really need to be proficient in whatever their practice is, then you're going to be able to find quote unquote engagement in that, just simply because you're offering up things that are valuable, right? If it's something that's a byproduct of politics or culture or economy, whatever it is, versus just the practice itself, those things are, if they're affecting the day-to-day lives of your members, they're going to tune in because it's what's on their mind.
Mhm. I was just thinking that even, like you said, your back catalog, I guess, can continue to serve you even if it was somewhat contextually specific, as long as you build that context in either into the content or into the ecosystem in which it's delivered. So if someone was responding to a policy that was enacted just before a conference and the recording happened at the conference, there might still be a reason to view that content, but the person, if they click into the video and all of a sudden it's just a guy and he's saying like, I think this is bad or whatever, if which you're looking in the archives of the internet and you're looking for a news article, the first thing you want to know is, when was this published? Was this 2024? Was this 2019? Like, I need to know like what the last update on this was. As long as a person is able to glean what the context for this information they're receiving was, it can continue to deliver value. And it's when it's divorced from that context that it loses its relevance from your back catalog, is kind of how I think.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. The more hot we'll say a topic is, because it's emergent, to a degree, it will kind of profess how quickly it will age, depending on how quickly the industry kind of evolves, typically year over year. So, say some sort of policy that was really shaking up a specific industry today, that can be dated in, say, 12 months time, but we don't know. Right, maybe that policy hangs around for the next 4 years. To put this in practical terms, like, we could think of what's happening now in 2025 with the new administration in America, and how associations themselves are being really disrupted by all sorts of different threats to their sustainability, really. So everything to do with that, say ASAE is going to be a big driver of trying to facilitate that conversation, because every association really in North America is going to be, but especially America, is going to be really wanting to tune in and follow, like, what the heck's going on and how is this going to affect me? Does that all that information get dated in a week's time, a month's time? I think it ultimately, in some cases, it's maybe there's some associations that aren't following it as closely as others until they're impacted, and then perhaps it becomes immediately relevant to them. But the most important thing is that in this case, say ASAE is striving very hard to try and facilitate and provide some clarity around the topics. So members are always going to remember that more than anything, that you were there for them to help facilitate that conversation, even if you don't have the answers. Right. Like, so this is where I think I know this is a bit of a tangent, but I would really want to share it on this note here, is that I think associations, and it comes from a good place in terms of, and it comes from a governance place. It's great to strive to have great governance and to make sure that you're providing information that's trustworthy. And I'm saying not that associations should not strive for that, but don't be so distracted on just doing that where you're not saying anything at all. Because not everything that you facilitate needs to be a statement of truth, in terms of your opinion, right? Like, you and I can have a conversation about what the next 6 months is going to look like. I'm not standing here saying I know what the next 6 months is going to look like. And if you're going to be offended if I get my prediction wrong, right? But if we weren't having that conversation, perhaps we're both anxious about the next 6 months, and we're actually getting some value out of, discussing what the 6 months looks like, just to kind of get what's on our mind out. And on a professional level and on an industry level, that may seem like a funny analogy, but isn't that exactly is what happens, or what's even happening right now in 2025, is that the situation's changing. No one has a lot of answers, but sure as heck everyone wants to be dialed in and tuned into that conversation.
Yeah, yeah, I'm really glad you said that. And I do think that associations are almost afraid that they want the last thing that they said to be the thing that ended up being true. But it really only matters that it was true or believed to be true in that moment. We make a lot of content that's about advancements in tech across various industries. And we report about what the technology looks like and where it's predicted to go at that minute in time. And we go back through those back catalogs, every couple years, and we evaluate all the videos and we think like, is that still true? And if it doesn't make sense anymore, we just delete it, right? Like we don't keep that from talking about what's true in the moment and where things are expected to go. Like we've done so many videos on drone delivery about like how soon is drone delivery expected to materialize? Where is that, like when is that probably going to happen? How close are we? And we've changed the answer to that many times as the policy and technology has kind of played out, and that's fine.
Yeah, what's important is what people thought at the time. Like it's perfectly natural. Just like it doesn't matter if you're talking about an industry or if you're talking as a human being with your lived experience to say what your prediction is. Like the point of my little analogy is to say, like, Marcus thinks this. He doesn't know this. It's just what he thinks. Right. So if it's drone delivery, well, Fred can think that, hey, it's going to come in the next 12 months. Actually, to some degree, it doesn't matter if it's true or not. I'm just listening in because, like, this is someone that's, say, very dialed into the developments in, say, drone technology and automation. And if they think it's 12 months, it's more something like, well, they think it's like here, ready to go. And that's just one data point in like the entire conversation around, say, drone delivery, right? No one's going to be offended if we brought forward a video of Fred saying he thinks that it's immediate when it's not, because it's a perspective. It's not the association getting on a podium saying, drone delivery will be here in 12 months. I've said it. So there it is. So, and then everyone gets offended because like that isn't what happened. Taking a humanistic approach to thinking about your message and the messaging inside of your content can help dispel some of the fear around what kind of conversations you're facilitating, because there's a big difference between someone's opinion and someone making a statement of fact. But the worst thing you can do is saying, we're not going to have the conversation because I don't want someone to say something that isn't ultimately true or going to be true, right? We're all adults and we all know what we're signing up for when someone says, I want to make a prediction or I have an opinion of what's important to me.
Yeah, unfortunately, as an association, you carry the burden at the very front of the conversation and you're speaking to other people that are on the cutting edge. So you don't have the luxury to report on what's true. You have to deal with speculation in order to be valuable to these people.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I'll just triple down on the conversation that we're all having right now in 2025 with the new administration. Again, posing some pretty disruptive threats, if you will, to the association world. No one knows what's really true in terms of what's going to happen. But what's really important is that people are having a conversation about what they think will happen and trying to decipher what is actually true in terms of if and when new legislation happens. That is something that the association can say is true. But the way that information is going to be facilitated as a reporting of facts. So say if ASAE has a podcast with some association executives just discussing where we are right now, no one out viewing that conversation is going to be unhappy that they're tuning in for this conversation. It's quite the opposite. It's like, I'm worried about this. I want to know what other people are worrying about it. Right. So there's a there's a clear difference between facilitating a conversation about people's opinions and statements of fact. So, Brianna, we were talking a lot about how content can be affected in terms of who it's really intended for, perhaps in reflection with the member journey, and also how relevant it is to, say, current changes in that industry versus things that are more long-standing. I'm curious on where you stand in terms of how content performance is affected or perhaps disrupted by where it inevitably lives.
Yeah, definitely. I think that where the content is ultimately served up, where the audience will encounter the content, should hugely influence what the content ends up being. And I'm going to use an easy to understand example before I get into a little bit more. So imagine that you've got this scholarship video and it's going to live on this website that is specifically for applying for the scholarship. And it's just embedded in the middle of the page. And they scroll down and they click the video, and then it's like scholarship, scholarship, scholarship. And then it says, to apply for the scholarship, visit the scholarship website. You're on the scholarship website, right? Like, wouldn't it make more sense to be like something along the lines of press this button and then show the actual button, like that you could actually click that's actually there, or go to a relevant link in the website where you currently are. Or if you're not on the website and you're like, visit our website to make sure they actually know where they're going. Just think about the whole ecosystem that it lives in and what you want them to do, how you want them to act, and make sure that that's really easy to do. I would also argue that teams are kind of siloed a little too much between like content and then the distribution of that content. People end up making a lot of content that doesn't end up making sense for where it ends up finally being. And that can manifest in disengagement from the audience.
Can you give an example of that?
Yeah. So say you made a webinar and then your vehicle for that webinar was to it ultimately ends up on Instagram or something. Like, you're not on Instagram looking to engage with the webinar. You're just going to click right past that, right?
Yeah, recorded webinar, sure.
Yeah. I think you should think about what people expect from each format that they're about to engage with and what the pros and cons of each format are, and really lean into that. So, for example, how are people usually interacting with a podcast? They're usually listening to it while they're doing something else, right? So you want to, like, the advantages of content like that is it can be long form, right? You can circle back on some of the same concepts. You can like dig into tangents, but you don't want to focus on, say, if you and me were interacting with like a physical object right now and it played huge bearing on the audience's interpretation of the content that we were trying to make. That would be pointless. Why would we serve that up in a podcast? Unless it was a video specific podcast that could only be watched on video. So you and I are passing a box back and forth and we're like, like, we're not describing what's, in the box. Yeah. Oh, that's so cool. Oh, if only you could see it at home. Right.
Right.
Yeah. So,
which is funny enough, happens all the time on podcasts.
Yeah. But it makes me crazy when that happens. I'm like, don't you know this is a podcast?
Usually it's a screen where it's like, as you can see here, here's this breathtaking thing. That's amazing. You're like, what is it?
As you can't see. Yeah, I'm dying to see. But that's also true for other forms of content too, right? Like, every format has its pros and cons, like a visual medium. You really shouldn't be delivering content that's visual wallpaper when it's a video. People will question, why did this need to be a video, right? Why should I be delivering my eyeball attention to it if you're not showing me something that I need to see, right?
Right. That is a pretty classic one where I don't know how common it is these days, but we've all seen that where it's like, it's a video, but it's basically a title card. And then you have some like audio going on underneath it. And you're just like, am I supposed to look at the title card the whole time? It's like, it's almost awkward, like an awkward conversation. So yeah. And is the content designed actually to facilitate multitasking, which is not video? Like, if I'm going to go and engage with a video, it's because I'm very deliberately sitting down to view video content, well, at least that's what my expectation is. Where if I put on a podcast, my expectation is that I'm going to drive, I'm going to mow the lawn, like I'm going to be at the gym, like whatever it is. And I'll probably not get through it all. And next time I'm in a situation where I can multitask, I'll probably put the podcast back on and pick up where I left off.
Yeah, and you'll want that content to feel easy to slip in and out of if it's not meant to be consumed in one sitting. So you should think about that while you make it too. And people are designing shows like this now because people are said to have less attention span, right? Like they're said to be scrolling on their phone while they're watching a show. So they'll write shows now that you don't have to pay like full attention to, like where they'll introduce a premise like a couple of times just in case like the audience wasn't paying attention. They're like a little easier to follow. You don't have to hang off of every word. And you don't have to necessarily do that, but just think about where they're going to be and what the content is, like what their expectations are around that content.
Right. One takeaway from there is that if you are creating video content for folks, it's like, make sure that it's really easy to digest, that, when say the piece of content starts, that it's very clear in terms of setting expectations of like, what are the outcomes that you're going to get out of this and what are the topics being covered, and that the people that are participating on screen are being pretty to the point about it. Okay, Brianna, I thought it'd be fun to do kind of like a rapid fire quiz round. How's that sound?
I'm so excited. I've been on the show a few times now and there hasn't been anything like this, so.
We're going to...
Ho, 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 ho.
All right, there's your big fancy button.
There's some lore about me is I love props.
That's right. Brianna is a big fan of props. So we got the ultimate prop for you, a giant red button.
This is very exciting for me.
Okay, so here's what's going to happen. I'm going to ask you a series of questions, and I want you to tell me if it's a myth or reality. And they're all going to be about common kind of conceptions about engagement, specifically when it relates to, association programming and content and the like. How's that sound?
Okay, so I know this button and it only makes one noise, so I'm going to press it for myth. And then when it's not a myth, I just won't press it.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, so our first question is, if your content is good enough, members will engage no matter when or how you deliver it.
Nice. Myth. So it's not true. Content and context are equally important. King and queen, the two reigning monarchs of the land.
Excellent. Next question. More content equals more engagement.
Okay, I'm not pressing the button. Remember when we said earlier in this episode about if they can see things and if they cannot see things? I feel like the fact that this button makes a noise, we're nailing it. You hear that audio experience for everyone that's listening on Spotify. Beautiful, beautiful. But yeah, that one's only kind of true. More content is usually better, but at some point, flooding the market is going to stop working for you, and it dilutes the value of each individual piece of content. So I think it's better to have content that's more intentional. Act like everyone is going to be consuming every single piece of content, but don't expect it.
Next question. If members aren't engaging, it's because the content itself isn't valuable.
Boo, no. Let's going back to the ice cream analogy that I said. There could be a lot of things that are wrong with the context of the content, and definitely look at those first before you scrap content that could be delivering really great value for your members.
And our final question is, posting content on multiple platforms at once increases engagement.
Sort of. I'm not going to press it. So I think that it can really be a crummy member experience if you're just taking the exact same content and being like, how about this? Now on Instagram, now on YouTube, now on your website, now it's a social media or whatever. Really think about, yes, spreading content across multiple formats and on multiple platforms, but making sure you actually lean into what makes that content valuable in each of those locations.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, each platform that you could be posting content to really has its own culture in terms of the users there. Whenever we go from one platform to another, we have expectations around what we're going to find there and even how it's formatted. But my little dip into this because I feel very passionately about it, is simply that if you're making content and you're delivering it anywhere really but your website, then how's it being a part of the value proposition of your membership? Not to say that you shouldn't be creating content for platforms to extend reach, but we just need to kind of put down a flag and categorize these things properly. Content for your website is all about procuring recruitment and in reinforcing your value proposition, so AKA retention. And posting content on any sort of additional platforms is just to, again, extend that reach and hopefully push, think about it as part of a funnel, get people to your website so they can view the benefits of membership.
Yeah, I'm glad you really tied a bow on that. Bringing it back to the member value proposition. If you're taking your conversion mechanisms and just putting them on Facebook, I don't think they're going to do much converting for you.
No, not necessarily. Well, fantastic. I think that's a good place for us to end. Really like what you had to say there, Brianna, about context. Obviously, the quality of the content itself is a big driver if people are going to engage, but the context as well.
Content and context, like we keep saying, are equally important. You got to have that sweet, cold ice cream on the hot, hot day.
Okay, I love it. Brianna, thanks again for being on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for spending time with us on Association Amplified. Until next time, take care and keep inspiring your members.